50,000 people live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and almost none of them speak English as their first language. Not because they can't. Because they chose not to. Walk down Bedford Avenue on a Saturday morning and you'll see men in black coats and wide-brimmed hats moving through the streets like it's still 1890. Women pushing strollers, speaking Yiddish, not as a hobby, not as a nostalgia trip, but as the actual language of their actual lives. Kids playing outside who have never watched a Netflix show, never scrolled TikTok, never heard of whatever celebrity everyone else is obsessing over this week. And here's the thing that'll mess with your head, these aren't people who got left behind by the modern world. These are people who looked at the modern world, studied it carefully, and said, no thank you. This is the Satmar Hasidic community. And their story is one of the most misunderstood, most unfairly covered, and honestly most remarkable stories in all of American history. Because these people, the ones the New York Times treats like a curiosity, the ones politicians talk about but never talk to, these are the direct descendants of Holocaust survivors. Not metaphorically. Literally. The grandparents and great-grandparents of the children playing outside those Brooklyn brownstones walked out of Auschwitz. They survived Bergen-Belsen. They buried their brothers in mass graves in the forests of Eastern Europe and somehow, they kept going. And when they came to America, they didn't do what everyone expected. They didn't assimilate. They didn't trade the Torah for a television set and call it freedom. They made a decision, radical, deliberate, almost defiant, to rebuild everything they had lost. Every tradition. Every prayer. Every Yiddish word. Brick by brick, family by family, block by block, right there in Brooklyn. For 70 years, that worked. New York let them be. Then the government showed up. And what the state of New York did next, in the name of education, in the name of progress, in the name of protecting the children, cracked open a fight that is still raging today. A fight that forces every single one of us to ask a question we're not comfortable answering. In America, who gets to decide how a child is raised? The Satmar are not just any Hasidic group. They are the largest Hasidic dynasty on earth. And their particular brand of Jewish observance is more intense, more deliberate, and more architecturally precise than almost any religious community you will find anywhere in the Western world. Their founder, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, survived the Holocaust personally, boarding the Kastner train out of Budapest in 1944. Detained at Bergen-Belsen, before finally reaching safety in Switzerland with 1,600 other Jews while millions around them were dying. When he arrived in Brooklyn in 1947, he wasn't just starting a congregation. He was rebuilding a civilization. Not just the buildings. The whole world. The language, the dress, the food, the prayers, the marriages, the schools, everything reconstructed from the ashes of Europe, right there on the streets of Brooklyn. And that reconstruction worked. Beautifully. Williamsburg today is one of the fastest-growing Jewish communities on the planet. Large families. A community where nobody goes hungry because the community itself won't allow it. Where elderly people are cared for. Where strangers share Shabbat meals. Where a level of communal solidarity exists that most Americans, drowning in loneliness and disconnection, would genuinely envy if they ever stopped long enough to look. But then there are the schools. In a Satmar yeshiva, boys spend the majority of their day studying Torah and Talmud. Ancient texts. Centuries of rabbinic commentary. A rigorous intellectual tradition that has preserved Jewish identity through expulsion, inquisition, and genocide. Math gets taught. Basic reading gets taught. But science, history, English literature, those are not the priority. They never have been. For the Satmar, producing a learned Torah scholar is the highest achievement a boy can reach. That is not backwardness. That is a value system. A coherent, internally consistent value system that has survived longer than most nations currently on the map. But here is where the story stops being simple. The state of New York looked at what was being taught, and more importantly, what wasn't, and made a decision. These kids cannot read English fluently. They cannot do grade-level math. And if they ever want to leave this community, even just to get a job, pay taxes, navigate a hospital, they won't have the tools to do it. That argument is not crazy. It is worth sitting with. Because somewhere in the gap between two defensible positions, are tens of thousands of children whose entire future is being decided by people arguing over their heads. In 2015, an advocacy group called Outlived filed a formal complaint with the New York City Department of Education on behalf of 52 graduates, parents, and teachers. They alleged that boys in these schools were graduating without being able to read a job application in English. Without being able to calculate basic percentages. Without knowing who Abraham Lincoln was. The state was now involved. And it was not going away. The state said, "Fix it. Teach what we tell you to teach. Meet our standards. And if you don't, we will pull your funding and revoke your approval." The Satmar community's response was immediate. And it was not quiet. Thousands of community members flooded the streets of Williamsburg in protest. Rabbis issued statements. Lawyers were hired. And the community made their position absolutely clear: you do not get to walk into our schools, into our world, into the civilization we rebuilt from ash, and tell us what our children need to know. We survived Pharaoh. We survived the Inquisition. We survived Hitler. We will survive the New York State Education Department. The Satmar community is not uneducated. The men who run these negotiations, who hire these lawyers, who file these legal briefs, they are sharp. They are strategic. They have been navigating hostile governments for 2,000 years. What looks from the outside like stubborn resistance is, from the inside, a community that has learned, at tremendous cost, that every time they opened the door to outside influence, that influence eventually tried to destroy them. The Enlightenment came for them. Communism came for them. Nazism came for them. And every single time, the communities that assimilated the most were the ones that disappeared fastest. That is not paranoia. That is pattern recognition built on mass graves. Some of the loudest voices demanding change, demanding that these boys get a real secular education, are not outsiders. They are former Satmar members. Men who grew up inside these yeshivas, who left the community as adults, and who found themselves, in their 20s and 30s, functionally unable to compete in the outside world. No diploma. No English. No math. No way in. One former student put it simply: leaving the community felt less like walking out a door and more like being dropped into a foreign country without a passport. That image should stop everyone, on both sides, cold. So where does this leave us? The New York State Education Department spent years negotiating, threatening, and drafting new regulations. In 2022, they finalized rules requiring yeshivas to provide what the state calls substantially equivalent education, meaning secular subjects taught at a level comparable to public schools. Schools that refused would lose state funding. The Satmar community immediately challenged it in court. Appellate courts have upheld the state's right to enforce those regulations. But budget battles and legal challenges have repeatedly modified the enforcement timeline. Nobody has been shut down. Nobody has fully complied. And the children are still sitting in those classrooms right now, today, while the adults figure it out. This is not a story about bad people. It is not a story about a government trying to destroy a religion or a community trying to hide its children from the world. It is a story about two legitimate fears colliding in the same zip code. The state fears that tens of thousands of children will reach adulthood without the tools to participate in American society. The community fears that the moment those tools arrive, the English, the math, the science, the standardized tests, the slow erosion begins. And 2,000 years of history have taught them exactly where that erosion ends. Both fears are real. Both fears are reasonable. And neither side has figured out how to honor the others without betraying their own. What makes this story genuinely tragic, not dramatic, not controversial, but tragic, is that the people paying the price for this standoff are not the lawyers or the state officials holding press conferences. They are a 12-year-old boy in a Williamsburg yeshiva who has never been asked what he wants. Who has never been told that this argument exists. Who is learning Talmud right now, in a language his great-grandfather brought out of a concentration camp, completely unaware that his entire future is the subject of a court case he cannot read. That boy is not a symbol. He is not a political argument. He is a kid. And whatever you believe about religious freedom, about state authority, about assimilation, about survival, that kid deserves better than to be the casualty of a fight he never chose. Satmar outlived Auschwitz. They outlived Stalin. They outlived every empire that ever decided they needed to become someone else. Whether they can outlive this, a fight not with an enemy, but with a country that actually means well, that is the question nobody has answered yet. And if you think this story is complicated, there is another community, in another American city, facing an eerily similar battle. 2,000 years of persecution couldn't erase them. But Chicago might be finishing the job. That video is right up there. And after everything you just watched, it will land differently than you expect.